On June 28, 1919, exactly 6 months after the armistice that silenced the guns of the First World War, history paused for a moment in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. It was a bright summer morning when the victors of a conflict that had claimed more than 16 million lives gathered to witness the formal sealing of peace. Germany, excluded from the treaty's drafting, looked on in silence as representatives of France, Britain, the United States, and Italy affixed their signatures to a document designed to reshape the world order. At the heart of this gathering were the Big Four: Georges Clemenceau of France, determined to secure his nation against any future German aggression; David Lloyd George of Britain, balancing imperial interests with continental stability; Woodrow Wilson of the United States, champion of a new era of self-determination and collective security; and Vittorio Orlando of Italy, advocating for territorial gains. Each brought to Versailles a distinct vision of justice and reconstruction, yet each would find compromise unavoidable. France bore deep scars from the war. Trenches and shell craters still pockmarked its northeastern provinces. Clemenceau insisted that any lasting peace must prevent Germany from ever again threatening French soil. Across the Channel, Britain sought to protect its maritime supremacy and preserve trading partnerships, mindful that a completely crippled Germany risked economic collapse that could spill across Europe. In Washington, President Wilson envisioned peace not as vengeance, but as a framework for enduring cooperation, an arrangement anchored in open diplomacy, national self-determination, and an international league empowered to adjudicate disputes. Yet when the German delegation arrived, they found themselves presented with a fait accompli. Excluded from the negotiations, they were offered the treaty to sign or face renewed hostilities. In that moment, humiliation became the defining emotion. The signatories asserted that Germany and its allies alone bore responsibility for the war. This war guilt clause served as the legal foundation for demanding reparations, monetary and material payments intended to compensate devastated regions and rebuild shattered economies. To many Germans, however, it represented an intolerable accusation, a stain on their national honor that would fester for years to come. Territorial realignments under the treaty were dramatic. Alsace and Lorraine returned to France after nearly 50 years under German rule. The new Polish state gained access to the Baltic Sea via the so-called Polish Corridor, severing East Prussia from the German mainland. In the north, Schleswig was partitioned, with portions ceded to Denmark. Eupen-Malmedy passed to Belgium. The resource-rich Saar Basin was placed under League of Nations administration for 15 years, its coal revenues earmarked for France. The city of Danzig became a free port under international oversight, a nod to competing Polish and German claims. Beyond Europe, Germany's colonial empire was dismantled. African territories once governed from Berlin became mandates of Britain, France, Belgium, South Africa, and Japan. This wholesale redistribution marked the twilight of 19th century imperialism and inaugurated a fragile experiment in international trusteeship. Reparations loomed over Germany with crushing weight. Although the treaty left the exact figure to be determined later, it stipulated payments both in cash and in kind. Coal, steel, livestock, and industrial equipment were requisitioned. Rail networks and factories transferred to Allied control. When the sum was fixed at 132 billion gold marks in 1921, Germany's fragile economy teetered on the brink. Hyperinflation engulfed the nation by 1923, rendering savings worthless, fueling social unrest, and undermining confidence in the fledgling Weimar Republic. In parallel, the treaty imposed strict military constraints. The German army was limited to 100,000 volunteers. Conscription was abolished. Tanks, military aircraft, submarines, and poison gas were banned. A demilitarized zone along the Rhine would be occupied by Allied forces for 15 years. These provisions temporarily neutered Germany's armed strength, yet they also drove clandestine efforts to preserve military expertise, secret officer training, covert alliances with sympathetic foreign militaries, and the rise of paramilitary groups. Thus, the very measures intended to guarantee peace sowed the seeds of subversion. Perhaps the treaty's most ambitious legacy was the League of Nations. Inspired by Wilson's 14 points, the League sought to replace power politics with dialogue, sanctions, and collective security. Its covenant, enshrined within the treaty, committed members to respect each other's territorial integrity and to act against aggressors. But critical flaws emerged from the outset. The victors retained disproportionate influence. Germany and other former enemies would be admitted only after meeting onerous conditions. Most consequentially, the United States Senate refused to ratify the treaty, and America never joined the League. Without American leadership and resources, the League's capacity to enforce its own resolutions was severely compromised. Back in Berlin, the treaty's terms ignited a firestorm of outrage. To Germans across the political spectrum, the settlement was a diktat, a dictated peace imposed without negotiation. Right-wing factions labeled the signatories November criminals, igniting conspiracy theories and radical propaganda. The sense of national humiliation merged with economic misery and territorial loss to fuel extremist movements. In that volatile environment, Adolf Hitler and the nascent Nazi Party seized upon resentment toward Versailles as a rallying cry. Efforts to stabilize reparations in the 1920s offered only temporary relief. The Dawes Plan of 1924 rescheduled payments and opened the door to American loans, ushering in a brief era of prosperity and cultural flourish known as the Golden Twenties. The Young Plan of 1929 further reduced reparations and set a final payment date. Yet these gains collapsed with the Wall Street crash of October 1929. As the Great Depression spread, reparations became politically toxic once again. Germany suspended payments, and the international order unraveled. In defiance of Versailles, clandestine rearmament intensified throughout the 1930s. In March 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, trampling treaty guarantees and confronting a divided allies. Within 3 years, Germany had rebuilt its armed forces in open breach of Versailles, an ominous prelude to a second global conflagration. The Treaty of Versailles endures as a cautionary tale. It succeeded in ending the First World War and laid groundwork for international cooperation, but its punitive measures also fomented enduring bitterness and economic collapse. By imposing harsh terms on a defeated adversary, the Allies underestimated the power of grievance to destabilize fragile polities. In the decades since, peacemakers have grappled with the balance between accountability and reconciliation. From the Dayton Accords in the Balkans to post-conflict rebuilding in Iraq and Afghanistan, the lessons of 1919 remind us that sustainable peace demands more than the stroke of a pen. It requires economic opportunity, respect for sovereignty, and inclusion of all stakeholders in shaping a shared future. As we reflect on that clear summer day in Versailles, we recognize both the promise and the perils of peace settlements. The negotiations in the Hall of Mirrors embody the tension between justice and retribution, between the rights of victors and the dignity of the vanquished. June 28, 1919, marked not only the end of a war, but also the beginning of a troubled interlude that would lead once more to conflict. In today's world, still scarred by violence and division, the Treaty of Versailles offers a timeless reminder. Lasting peace emerges not from the dictate of victors, but from the willingness of former foes to build a future together. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this examination of Versailles enlightening, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on how we can forge durable peace in our own time.